to the 6th episode of the Sacred Gut Punch. I'm Dr. Tomi White-Bryan. I'm a coach and consultant in human and organizational performance and the creator of Emotional Intelligence 3.0, a system for achieving extraordinary performance. We have someone as our guest today that I just adore. She's a delightful human being. She is a law partner at my husband's law firm. Her name is Margaret Burnham, and she is a delightful soul. I met her, I think, Margaret, in 1988, the summer of 1988, when Jim, my husband, was law clerking at your firm. I think I have that right, yes?
Yes.
So you have been able to tolerate me for 36 years. You and Jim Bryan.
It's been a delight.
Well, Margaret, thanks for being our guest today. And let's start with your sacred gut punch. Can you share with us the story of your journey?
I'll be glad to. Sacred wouldn't be the adjective I would use. I would just jump right into gut punch. My kids were 7 and 10. And because I had an uncle with colon cancer in his medical history, my doctor suggested I get an early colonoscopy, which I did, and it was fine. But they said, oh, because of that family history, why don't you come back in 5 years? So I did, and I wasn't expecting any problems because there were no problems with the first one. But when I woke up from the procedure, you get some kind of anesthesia, a light version. So when I woke up, the first thing I realized was I had a migraine, and which was so appropriate because the next thing I realized was my GI doctor, who I adore, Joe the Man, was standing at the foot of my bed crying, waiting for me to wake up. And I was like, this doesn't look like a good situation. I think I'll just close my eyes and go back to sleep. So she told me that she suspected that I had a malignant tumor and that she had already brought a surgeon by to see me while I was asleep, who I later came to know as Dr. Jay Wyatt, who was my Greensboro surgeon. And that began the process, was this waking up and finding out. I mean, you're really lucky when you have a doctor that cares enough that she was waiting for me to wake up to tell me in person, but she couldn't hold back the tears.
Margaret.
So long story short, I had colon surgery in March of 2006. And then I had a few complications where my internal stitches ruptured and I had peritonitis. So I had emergency surgery the second day I was home from the hospital. And then I had to go back in to have additional surgery 3 months later to reverse everything they did because of the original emergency. And during that reversal surgery, my doctor, Jay Wyatt, and I, we called it my happy surgery because I was getting rid of a colostomy. So I was jumping up and down. I mean, I wanted a parade. But he noticed that because he had my full medical history, he knew that the risk of Mets would be to my liver or to my lungs. And my liver was exposed during the surgery. So he checked and he found 3 Mets. And I was so devastated. But my doctor said, don't worry, nobody's given up on you. This means it's going to be more complicated, but nobody's given up on you.
So, Margaret, I know many of the same doctors, Dr. Wyatt and a couple of the others that treated you through my father's own journey of colon cancer. And for those of our listeners who haven't experienced cancer in this way, what is a MET?
When you have cancer in one organ and it metastasizes to another organ. So I started out with just colon cancer, and the doctors were like, oh, you're so lucky. It's just stage 1. It hasn't breached the colon wall. You won't need chemo. You won't be radiation. You are so lucky. And then 3 months later, it was stage 4 once the doctor found the Mets on my liver, which meant my colon cancer had metastasized to my liver. So it's not the same as liver cancer. It was the same cancer cells as what I had in my colon somehow made their way to my liver. And so I had spots in 3 places, which then, of course, then complicated the liver surgery because they removed like a Jello cube around each Met. And so the whole thing took 9 hours.
Well, and Margaret, so my father, when they finally operated on him, he had way more than 3 mets on his liver. And they told us, just take him home and make him comfortable. And, I know Dr. Wyatt, real fine man. And I love that he had a sense, I already have her open. Let me just double check. Because if he hadn't done that.
Oh, there's a lot of what ifs. If I hadn't ruptured, if I hadn't had the original complication 2 days after my first surgery and had a colostomy, which they then had to reverse, if that hadn't happened, they would never have suspected or found the Mets. And Dr. Wyatt said I would have gone into liver failure and it would have been too late for them to do anything. So the way it all happened, I'm supposed to feel lucky.
It's hard to, isn't it, Margaret? It's hard. Yeah. Well, and that's because the rest of the journey, right? You then had to go somewhere else for treatment. They gave you 3 options, right? What did they suggest for you?
Right. So when Dr. Wyatt found the Mets on my liver, at the time, nobody in Greensboro did that kind of specialized surgery where they have to go in and do what they call a liver resection. Only for me, they had to do it 3 times. Plus, my doctor felt compelled to mention to me that there was 5 hours of scar tissue that he had to deal with before he even got to the main surgery because of all these abdominal surgeries I had had. So basically, when they discovered that complication, the first thing Dr. Wyatt had me do was see a Greensboro oncologist, Brad Sherrill, who is also one of my heroes.
Yeah, Margaret, can I stop you right there? Dr. Sherrill treated my dad. I mean, we have all these same people, right, in the community who are just fabulous people. So, I mean, it was a horrible time, but we had great people in our path, didn't we?
I feel so lucky. I had a great team, and all of my doctors in Greensboro, my internist, Mary John Baxley, my surgeon, Jay Wyatt, my GI doctor, Jody Mann, Brad Sherrill, they all conferred and came up with a plan that one of my best options was right in our backyard at Duke. So the plan was to have the liver resection there, which is what I ended up doing. But I had to have 6 rounds of chemo first and then 6 rounds of chemo afterwards. And then I qualified for a clinical trial where they took my own dendritic white blood cells and made a concoction and re-injected me with what I would call a first phase immunotherapy. And that followed all of the surgeries and all of the chemotherapy. So I had a lot done. So just to give a shout out, my Duke team was Dr. Michael Morris was my Duke oncologist, and my Duke surgeon was Dr. Brian Clary, who, when his secretary called me and scheduled the liver surgery for Valentine's Day, and I was sitting at my desk, and I said, well, I think you have the wrong person because I just had chemo, and my chemo report shows that the Mets disappeared. They can't see the Mets anymore on the CT scan. So I don't need surgery. You need to call somebody else because I'm busy on Valentine's Day and I don't need surgery. And she said, well, Dr. Clary doesn't usually make mistakes like that. So let me check with him and I'll call you back. And 5 minutes later, she called me back and she said, well, it's true that the chemo shrunk your Mets, but they never go away. They come back. They're sneaky. And he does need you to have surgery, and was wondering if you could come to Duke on February 14th. And I just thought that was kind of a cruel irony. But it makes it easy to remember because every year on Valentine's Day, I call Dr. Clary and say, thank you, I'm still here.
Well, Margaret, your daughters were young at this point. I can't imagine. Yeah, I get teary-eyed.
It was tough. That was the hardest part for me. I mean, I certainly didn't want to die. That was not on my to-do list. But way, way more pressing than that was the maternal instinct to be the one to raise your children. And when I was first diagnosed in March of 2006, Madeline was 10 and Katie was 7. And it was tough. I tried to protect them. I didn't do that good a job because, when you're in the hospital, you can't hide that. But for the longest time, I wouldn't even use the cancer word. I called it a tumor. I couldn't even say the word cancer. And I didn't want to scare them. but yeah, that was the hard part, having small children. But let me tell you, my friends came out of the woodwork. I mean, friends, neighbors, of course, family, people at the law firm, people came out of the woodwork to help me. And one of the things I learned that has helped me when someone gets a new diagnosis is you don't call and leave a voicemail or send a text to say, hey, what can I do? How can I help? You just show up and do something. And so people were coming to my house saying, I'm taking the girls for a sleepover weekend. We'll come back Sunday night. You just rest. Or I'm dropping off food and here's what it is. And I'm going to pick up your kids from school every day this week so you don't have to deal with that. I mean, that was so helpful because I would never have called anybody and said, hey, can you pick up my kids? I mean, I would have felt uncomfortable. So now I know you show up and you just start doing things that are needed, and don't wait to be asked, because that's a hard ask for someone who's dealing with a serious illness.
You know, Margaret, I love that advice because people want to help. They just don't know how. So I love this. Just show up and just do something, right?
Oh, they were taking school moms at St. Pius were taking my kids to events. It was just, I was really, really lucky because it helped a lot. Because when you're going through chemo, let alone recovering from surgery, but when I was going through chemo, I felt like I was filled with cement, and it was hard just to even get up off the sofa. So, like, if I had to go to St. Pius and pick my kids up at school, that was like a 2-hour process to start thinking about, okay, in an hour, you have to get up, you got to walk to the car, you got to drive and get in that carpool line. I mean, for some reason, not the first 3 days, but days 4, 5, and 6 of chemo just knocked my socks off. And so I was so grateful. It was an embarrassment of riches.
Well deserved, Margaret. You're a great soul.
Lucky, but again, I'd be the last person to call it any kind of sacred gut punch. It was just a gut punch over and over and over. And I kept telling the doctors, first of all, don't tell me any bad news. Just tell me where to be and when to be there, and I will be there. But don't tell me that X% of people don't make it, because that's not helpful to me. And it's not me. It's not me. It's some statistics that are already old. So I tried not to read too much. I stayed away from any grim news, and I tried to be optimistic. You know, sometimes that works, and sometimes you just need a boohoo. And you know, when you need a boohoo, I'll tell you a story. This one makes my family cry every time I tell it. I was sitting at Cone Hospital, and I had woken up to have a colostomy, which we'll save for another day. But it wasn't particularly good news. And this was after my emergency surgery, which was right after my original colon resection. And I was sitting on the edge of my hospital bed, looking out the window, thinking, how has my life, how has this happened? What am I doing here? What, I want my old life back. And I just had the biggest pity party. I think I was crying so hard, like my shoulders were like, doing the full up and down thing. And I became aware of a woman sitting down next to me, and she put her arm around me, and she said, don't worry. She said, we're going to get you through this. Whatever it is, we're going to get you through this. And I had no idea if a friend of mine had dropped by, if a nurse was there. I was still crying. All I knew is there was this person sitting next to me with her arm around me, telling me that she was going to stay there until we figured out how to make my day better. And whatever I needed, she wasn't moving until she could figure out what it was. So eventually I stopped crying. I turned to see who's sitting next to me, and it was the hospital janitor. And
oh my gosh,
she had this big old trash can bucket, that's got the trash bags and mops and brooms sticking out of it, and like spraying for the sink. And that's who was my angel that day, was this little tiny, she couldn't have weighed 90 pounds. And she just saw I was a mess, and she just sat down, and I bet she was there 20 minutes. It could have been 2 hours, because I was just lost in my pity party. But that's the kind of thing I experienced. Yes. Oh, and I didn't think to get her name. I wish, so one of my biggest regrets is I don't have her name, but hopefully if she's listening, she'll know it was her.
And she was an angel.
She was an angel. But that happened over and over and over again. I mentioned to you when you asked me to be on the show that sometimes I hear people say, or I read people that have written that they're glad that they had cancer because it made them a better person and it changed their lives. I'm like, I don't buy it, and I think those people are pathological liars. I'm not glad I had cancer, but I will admit that the one good thing that has come of having cancer, having had cancer, is that I feel in a unique position to help people who have been diagnosed because I can say, been there, done that, and you can get through this. And sometimes that's all people need to hear.
Yeah. So Margaret, there are two things I want to, I'm already in tears, right? I'm over here with the tissues out. You've got angels all around you. But one of the things that's really important in emotional well-being is people role modeling whatever you need, right? And one of your law partners connected you to someone who could role model this healthy in the face of a deadly disease.
Yes. And when I first got diagnosed, many people sent me cards or emails or called sharing with me their cancer journey, which I really appreciated because some people who shared with me, I never knew that they had had breast cancer or whatever was the particular illness. And I really appreciated that people would just open up their hearts like that. But what I realized was it didn't help me in the same way that Gordon Cole helped me. One of my partners was neighbors with Gordon Cole, who has since passed away, but I'll never forget him because he called me and he said, "You don't know me, but I'm friends with a friend of yours. And I just wanted you to know that I had colon cancer with mets to the liver and I'm still here. So I will take you to breakfast, lunch, or dinner. I will come to your house. You can come to my house. We can meet wherever you want. But I'm on your team. And I want you to know if I can beat this, you can beat this." And what a godsend, because if I didn't have one foot in the grave, I had both feet in the grave. And here was this kind person who didn't know me from Adam calling me up saying, "Let me help you. I've had exactly what you've been diagnosed with." And that was such a blessing because I could look at him and say, if he had what I have and he's still alive, then why am I worried about not giving this 100% in my fight? And Gordon and I were friends for the rest of his life. He lived many years after that. We became constant companions because he not only helped me, he helped me learn how to help other people. And sometimes when it was serious, we had to tag team.
Margaret, Jim and I had the good fortune a couple of weeks ago of seeing, a speaker at the Bryan series. I've gotten old, so I forget things easily. I'm trying to think of, Ashley Judd, that was her name. And she's a big mental health advocate. And she says, hurt, heal, help. And your helping has been of such an amazing magnitude. The world is so lucky to have you to show up.
Well, I am honored to do any payback I can. I owe 1,000 favors. Ironically, word of mouth is how I find most people who have been diagnosed. Sometimes my good friend Jody Mann, who is my GI doctor, still my GI doctor, she'll call and say, "Can I give your name to somebody?" And I'm like, "You don't even have to call and ask me. Just I'll sign whatever you need for HIPAA. But you just give my name to anybody." But sometimes it's a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend who knows a neighbor. I mean, there's somebody I correspond with in California that my brother met. And I love it when someone gets to me because then I can try to help shed some hope that this is something that doctors now know how to treat. and it's not so awful as it used to be. I remember one time I was meeting with Dr. Cheryl in Greensboro. This was early on. I'd make a legal pad of notes, and he'd just like, oh God, here comes the lawyer. So I was having just a regular checkup with him, and we're going through my questions. And the last question I had was the hardest question I ever asked anybody during this 18-month, very long dark tunnel. And that was, and I mean, I had to spit the words out, but the question said, do I have any reason to have hope? And I never had the nerve to ask any of the doctors that. They were all acting like they were doing everything they could to help me, but I didn't know whether I was a lost cause. I didn't know what it was. I knew it was serious. I certainly got the message with 6 major surgeries, 4 minor surgeries, and 12 rounds of chemo and my clinical trial. I mean, I knew it was serious, but I was so scared to ask the question, do I have any reason to have hope? And Dr. Cheryl, he looked at me. He's such a kind person. He looked at me and he just shook his head and he said, oh, honey, of course you have reason to hope. Do you think we would be doing all of this if we didn't think there was a reason we could turn this around? And I was like, really? Really? And it was so funny because it was such an important question, such a basic question, but it was the hardest one I had to spit out. And I bet it was on my 3rd or 4th appointment before I could work up the courage to ask the question. And that's another thing. Cancer will bring out any religion you have in you, will bring it out in spades. And I started realizing that there were 3 things I was really short on, and that was courage, strength, and grace. Mm-hmm. So when I got really nervous about going off to surgery or even driving for these CAT scans, because for the first 5 years, I had CAT scans every 3 months. For the second 3 years, I had CAT scans every 2 months. And then it changed to once a year for like the next 3 years. So I had a lot of CAT scans. And so sometimes when I was just nervous about waiting for the results of what the CAT scan might have showed, they were always clear, but you don't assume anything when you've had cancer. And so you wait around until this little beeper goes off that the radiologist has the report ready for your surgeon. And I just remember when I was really scared, I would repeat over and over in my head, not out loud, courage, strength, grace, courage, strength, grace, courage, strength, grace. Like I could convince myself of that. And a priest friend, Father Louis, later told me he called those bullet prayers, straight to the ears of God. And I just love that visual because that's basically what I was doing, was just crying out for help.
Well, Margaret, you have this beautiful, as if I haven't cried enough already in this episode. I'm silently over here just blubbering away. Thank goodness that we don't have video. You have this beautiful story about the metal.
Oh, yes. So when I was first diagnosed and everybody was like, oh, you are a lucky girl. If you're going to have cancer, stage 1 is what you want. And so I was feeling, wow, okay, this isn't so bad. It's, short term. But the day that Dr. Wyatt came into my room to tell me that he found the 3 mets on the liver, he said he intentionally waited a couple of days because he needed me to heal from a 12-inch abdominal incision. And he wanted to make sure that he had the biopsy results back. So I was in my room and I was so proud of myself because that particular day they'd managed to get me out of bed. I was sitting upright in those nasty plastic armchair things that they have at hospitals that you stick to. And I was sitting in my chair and I really wasn't thinking about anything. But then all of a sudden, Dr. White came in, and usually the doctors, they round in the morning and they'll tell you what's up for the day and when you might be able to go home and that sort of thing. But this particular day, he picked up a chair and he brought it over next to where I was sitting and he put the chair down right in front of me. So we were like knee to knee. And all of a sudden, I became aware that my sister, Dorothy, was there and she had flown home from Africa where she was posted with the State Department at the time.
So, Margaret, let me stop you right there. That's your first clue, isn't it? When something like that happens, right? That, a family member's come that far, you're like, oh, you have that sinking feeling, don't you? Oh, this can't be good.
I'll be indebted to her for life. She flew home from Africa. She was posted in Tunisia at the time, and she flew home for 3 different surgeries. So
Wow.
you can't make up for that. But anyway, Dorothy was there. The charge nurse was there. The head nurse was there. Dr. Wyatt was there. And I just felt like a caged bird because all these eyes were looking at me. And I just knew the subliminal message wasn't good, right? I was trying to figure out what's happening here. This looks like some place where I don't want to be. I think I'll grab my IV pole and just bolt. And in fact, if I could have crawled under my bed, I would have. And Dr. Wyatt, in the kindest, most compassionate way, explained to me that he had found 3 mets on my liver and he had tested them and that they were malignant, which meant that things were going to get more complicated. And I just looked right. I mean, I'm sure I was crying already, not just crying, bawling my eyes out. But I managed to eke out the question, "You mean I'm stage 4 now?" And he shook his head and he said, technically, yes, but ain't nobody giving up on you. And boy, were those words I needed to hear. And what I didn't know was before he came in to talk to me, he had called Joe the man, the GI doctor, to let her know that he was going in to have to share this bad news with me, that the biopsy results had come back and they were malignant. So Joe the man, she probably canceled patients for the rest of the day. She runs home, and in a desk drawer at home, she had a little baggie, like a Ziploc sandwich bag. And in it was a picture of Mother Teresa and Mother Teresa giving her little 4-year-old daughter a miraculous medal. And Jody and her husband Dave are on either side of Mother Teresa. And I was already a Mother Teresa fan. You don't have to be Catholic or from India to be in the Mother Teresa fan club. I knew she'd one day become a saint. I was hoping my little healing would qualify for a miracle. I even wrote to them and because she needed a second miracle. But they said, no, when you get medical treatment, it doesn't count as a miracle because, you got healed with great surgeons and chemo and radiation. I didn't have radiation. Great surgeons, chemotherapy, immunotherapy. So we can't call you a miracle. We're really happy for you, but we can't use you for the second miracle. I tried. But anyway, Jody had in this baggie at her house a photo that I'm looking at right now of Mother Teresa handing this miraculous medal to Simran's little tiny 4-year-old outstretched hand. And she had saved the photo. She never framed the photo. She had the photo and this miraculous medal in a baggie in some drawer. And I was like, she stopped what she was doing at work. She drove home. She found the baggie, drove straight to my hospital room. And she said, "You must wear this miraculous medal." And even though I'm Catholic, I didn't know what a miraculous medal was. I'd never heard of it. I didn't know the story about it. Just must have missed Sunday school that day. So she told me about it. And I said, "Josie, you are so sweet and you are so kind, but I can't accept this because this one day will be a relic. Mother Teresa, this was hers. She passed it to your daughter. This is a family heirloom. You need to hold on to this." And Josie would not take no for an answer. She looked at me and she looked at the medal and she looked at me and she said, "I'm Sikh and you're a Catholic. Yeah, this is your saint, not mine. You're the one who should know what a miraculous medal is." And so she said, "You need to wear this." She said, "But if you keep fighting me on it," she said, I'll go away if you answer me one question. If your Mother Teresa was here in the room with us and she was offering the miraculous medal, would you turn her down? Would you say no? Or would you accept it and wear it until you're healed?" And I was like, okay, that makes it kind of hard to fight with you. So I put it on. I wore it for like 4 years. I was afraid to take it off. And then it got passed around with her permission to several other people who needed it more than me. And then it eventually made its way back to Josie when her mother had cancer. So it's a traveling miraculous medal. So now my favorite thing in the world is I go down to Father Louis' Catholic bookstore downtown called the Franciscan Center. And I buy 25 or 50. I buy them out. I mean, they're not expensive. And anybody, if you tell me you've been diagnosed with cancer, I just put one, I tape it inside a get well card and I mail it. And I'm like, I tell them the story and say, maybe this will help you the way it helped me. Because I can tell you, when I had my very worst moments, because there were so many surgeries, my tunnel was 18 months long, and it was dark and scary and lonely. Even with all these angels around me, it was still a long, dark tunnel. And when I had the very worst moments, I would take my hand and I would clasp it around that metal until the feeling of panic passed. And then I'd be like, okay, what do I need to do today? It was a wonderful gift. And I now have a framed photo of Mother Teresa giving the medal to Jyoti's daughter, which is, if my house burns down, I'm grabbing that and taking that with me.
Well, so Margaret, it feels like your bullet prayer and this medal, this miracle medal that you held on to, were two really important things that saw you through this dark night of the soul.
Well, that and I can't underestimate the way people wrap their arms around me. And because I'm Catholic, the night before my first, this is more than your listeners would even want to know, but the week before my first surgery, we had a prepaid ski trip to either Colorado or Utah because either one or both of my girls had qualified for a ski race. Mm-hmm. And so we had paid the registration fee for the race. We paid for ski in, ski out hotel. We had airfare. Everything was paid. So I made my then husband take my girls out to the race so they wouldn't miss the race because of me. So I thought that was, the good mom thing to do. So I sent them, my whole family, out of town. I wasn't going to lose the money, and I wanted Madeline to have the best chance of competing. And so all of a sudden, the night before that first surgery, I'm actually by myself because I'm the one who said, I drove them to the airport. I insisted on this. They didn't go willingly. So I called a priest. I've never called a priest in my life. I called a priest at St. Paul's, and I said, I'm really getting kind of scared. I'm having surgery tomorrow, and by a twist of fate, I'm by myself. He said, come right over. And he said, do you want to be anointed? And again, I just, bad Catholic, missed Vatican II, completely missed Vatican II. So I attributed anointing of the sick with what it was originally called, which was basically a prayer for people who were dying.
Right, like the last rites or something.
That's what it was called originally, last rites. So in my book, he was asking me if I wanted last rites. I didn't hear anointing of the sick. I heard last rites. And I looked at him like, appreciate it, but no, I really want to go into this with a bit more optimism than last rites, if you don't mind. Thank you, but you give that to the next person, give them mine. And he just shook his head like, it hasn't been last rites for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. It's called anointing of the sick now. And he had to get out a book and convince me it was not last rites. It was anointing of the sick.
Margaret.
So it was just the two of us, and he read this beautiful prayer. And I got to tell you, it also helped. It was very calming after I could get past the part about it not being last rites. I'm sure he's like, I want to see your card that you're even a Catholic, because I was flunking all my lessons left and right. But that all of these little things helped. I was surrounded by people that propped me up. Now I'll cry when I couldn't prop myself up.
You know what, Margaret? Isn't it so beautiful? One of the things that I've become very clear on about emotional well-being and becoming whole is it's a solo journey that you can't do alone.
Right.
Right. You must have people to support you along the way.
I'm sorry for laughing, but what you said just gave me another image. One of our partners at the time, Alex Barrett, his wife, Pam, was director of hospice.
Yes.
And one day I was sitting in my living room, sick as a dog. I'm going through chemo. This ties in with the last rites. And who's walking up my sidewalk but the director of hospice, right? I don't think of her as Pam. I'm like, holy cow, who called hospice?
And no one told me.
And she was just dropping off flowers, but I knew what her day job was, and
Yes.
I'm just sitting here reliving all this. I just remember the visual of looking out my window. I thought, I'm not even going to answer the door.
She's got forms for you to sign.
And she's the kindest, nicest person. She's just bringing flowers, but because of her day job, I had a heart attack when I saw her.
Margaret, it was such a hard journey for you, and I hope people won't misinterpret our laughter as disrespectful. But there are moments, right, where you really all you can do is laugh about it because it's just so, I mean, the director of hospice walking up your sidewalk, right? There's nothing else we can do, but
there were lots. I looked for ways to laugh to get me through this, and every time I went under anesthesia, the anesthesiologists at every hospital were full of lawyer jokes. And I'm like, seriously, that's what you got from me at a time like this? And I explained I did commercial real estate. I was not, a plaintiff's med mal attorney, that they were not at risk. But there were actually lots of funny stories. There were lots of heartwarming stories. I remember one time being at the cancer clinic at Wesley Long where I got my chemo treatments. And I told you I had to steer clear of anything that reminded me that I had cancer, because when I wasn't getting chemo, I was in a deep state of denial, to get through try to be a normal mom and be over at the school and, do all the things that, we had to do as moms. And I remember seeing a People magazine, which I normally love because it just, it's lighthearted. There's some interesting story about a celebrity in there. And on the cover of the People magazine was Farrah Fawcett dying from cancer. And as discreetly as I could, I just ripped the cover off, stuck it inside the magazine. So nobody else in the cancer clinic would have to see that headline.
Wow.
So I'm sorry, Wesley Long. Shout out. I owe you a People magazine. But there were just stories. Funny, I'll tell you another thing. When I went to Wesley Long, they would have these little check-in booths in the lobby, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 of them. And you would just wait your turn until they called your name. And almost to a fault, every one of them had little inspirational things taped to their little, work area. And if you saw something that you needed, they'd just take it, untack it, and say, "You take it."
Wow!
These were the check-in people trying to effectively minister to the patients that were coming up just for their appointments. And when you go back to see the doctor, everywhere I went, it was like that.
Well, so Margaret, you've made a generous offer that if anyone wants one of these medals, they can reach out to me and I will make sure that they get one from you.
I've got 100 of them, and I'll go get more. I'll gladly go get more if we run out. And my other offer is if any of the people who are listening to this have been diagnosed with colon cancer or know someone who's been diagnosed with colon cancer, and they feel like it would help them to meet and talk through what's going on, glad to do it, night or day, 24/7.
Margaret, that's such a generous offer to our listeners. Like I said, you're an amazing, wonderful human being. It's been a beautiful gift to me and now to our listeners to share in your experiences. Thank you for opening your heart and your wisdom to us. And just privileged to be your friend. Thank you so much for joining us, Margaret.
Thanks for having me. It was an honor to share my story. I hope it helps somebody.
Thanks, listeners, for joining me for another episode of the Sacred Gut Punch podcast. I'd like to thank our sponsors for making the podcast possible, the EI 3.0 companies of Bryan Insights and the Center for Emotional Wellbeing. And of course, to my wonderful husband, attorney Jim Bryan. You support me just all over the place, Jim. Everywhere I am, I'm there because you prop me up. Love you to the moon and back. If you're finding inspiration in the stories, please like and subscribe to the podcast and share with your friends and family who can benefit from these stories of resilience and rising. And if you're experiencing a sacred gut punch, remember, while you may feel alone, you are not. Help is out there. If you or someone you know is in crisis and considering suicide or self-harm, please seek support. Call or text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988 or chat at 988lifeline.org. And if you're not in the United States, Befrienders worldwide at befrienders.org can help you. Until next time, dear ones, may you use the difficulty as you rise with grace.